This video is an overview of the FX9750G3 dynamic graph menu icon, which is right here, if you look at my mouse, number 6 on the menu options on the graphing calculator. So a couple things that I'm going to always remind you of when we are working with the Casio graphing calculators is they're menu driven, and so to get to the menu icons you're interested in, you can scroll. So this is up here, number 1. So use this to arrow over, arrow down, and then hit execute, and that will enter you into the menu that you are interested in. But let's hit menu again. I can also just look for the number or letter at the bottom right corner of the menu icon I'm interested in and hit that. So if dynamic graphing, I would hit 6 and we're in. Once you get to a menu icon and you've entered it, the initial screen is your landing page, and here's where I want to make sure you check out a couple things. So this is graphing, so maybe there's some things I want to set up before I start doing graphing. And so another thing to always check when you go into a menu is the shift menu, which takes you to setup, and see if there's any setup things that you would like to have set up. So right now we're in dynamic graphing, and this is saying what kind of graphing dynamic. So dynamic means movement. Do you want it to be able to stop and you control it, or do you want it to be continuous where it's going to be almost like a movie playing? So you can change that here in the setup, and I'm also going to show you another place where you can change it. So shift menu often takes you to, depending on the menu icon you're in, to things that you can change and set up ahead of time so that you already have it. So I want graph function to be on because I'm in a graphing menu, so that makes sense. So I'm going to hit exit, which brings me to this number 5 down here. Whenever you are in a menu and you've gone into a specific functionality, so we went into the setup, if I want to get back to the initial screen or the screen before, I'm going to hit exit. So exit is how you escape from the current window you're in and go back, and it will stop. If you continue to hit exit, it will continue until you get back to the initial landing page. So here's the initial landing page for dynamic graphing. Another thing I want you to notice is this number 4 right here, and this number 3. So the function keys come into play the minute you go into a into a menu icon. So the initial landing page, you'll see everything you need is always on the screen right in front of you. And so it aligns to the functions. And so if I were to select the function under each one of these words, in this case functions, it would do something for me. So for example, if I had a function up here and I wanted to delete it and start fresh, I'd hit F2 and it would let me delete it and start over. So I'd hit F1 and yes, we want it to delete. This is dynamic graphing, and I can change the type of graph. Now, those of you who have looked at the graphing menu icon, not the dynamic, but the graphing, you'll notice that in dynamic, we have less options because dynamic means we're going to be using variables. So instead of 2x plus 3, we're going to use mx plus b or ax plus b, whatever it is we decide to use as our variables. And so we have less options. We're really working with functions where those coefficients make sense to use as variables because we're looking at transformations. So dynamic graphing is about transformations of functions, and so we're really kind of limited to make sure that we have actual functions. So that's why there's not as many as in the graphing menu. So let's hit exit. That gets us back to this landing page. So exit's a really important button when you're within any menu. It'll take you back a screen. This right here, variable, we're in dynamic function, which is all about changing variables to see how it transforms a function. And so there's an error here because I don't have a function that I have started on yet. So we're going to look at that later. BIN means built in, and we're going to talk about that as well. And recall means to bring something back. So these are the initial landing pages, but number 4 says don't forget to always look at option button, which gives you more options. So list, it'll let you put specific templates and names without having to type them out. So if I hit list, it's going to put that word list in here and let me find a list something from somewhere else and enter that into my dynamic function. So we're going to hit delete first of all because we don't actually want that. So option gives you more functionality. So notice when I hit option, I have different options up here, and I even have more this arrow key. If I hit F6, means there's more things that I can choose. And again, as in number 3, the functions that are underneath each one of these is how you open them. So if I hit angle, I can enter these angle symbols into my function if I need them. So that's where I get some of my other options. I never have to leave the menu I'm in. I don't have to go find buttons down here. Everything appears that I need right in the screen. So options gives me more options. This also is the same thing. Variables gives me some other options that I could use. So if I hit stat, what does that mean? So you'll see there's lots of different ways and options within the menu just by clicking these buttons and then using my function keys. So let's get back to our initial landing page and talk about what dynamic graph does. So here's my landing page. Dynamic graphing is to explore how different coefficients impact graphs. So I am going to use variables to explore. So think about parent functions and the transformations of those. So I'm going to just start with an easy one. I can enter my own variables if I want. So if, let's say, I'm working with students and we're thinking about the linear equation and we're trying to understand slope-intercept form. And so in the US, we tend to use m for slope and b for the y-intercept, so mx plus b. So I could enter that function in dynamic using variables instead of numbers. So we're going to do that here. I'm going to use my alpha key. So I'm fine with this type of graph. So remember, if I hit F3, I can change the type of graph. We're going to stay with y equals right now in our example. And so I'm going to hit alpha and get my m. So there's my m. I've entered a variable here. And now I'm going to hit my button over here for my x coefficient. My x variable, plus, and now we're going to do alpha again, b. So I can manually enter my own coefficients that are letters, so alphabet variables. And so when I'm done, as with graphing, I hit execute and set it. Now I want to actually talk about how do I set it up. And this is where, when I hit variables, now that I have variables, remember last time we had an error, but I have variables now, this is where it takes me to the setup of how we're going to be able to look at how those variables impact the equation. So let's say I want students to be exploring what the y-intercept does. So I'm going to leave my slope at 1. So 1 times x, so it's just x, the parent function, but then change my b value. And we can change this to any number we want. So let's just start at 0, right? So we're going to hit execute when I set it. So my start values are m is 1 and b is 0 because that's the parent function of those values. And I want you to see up here, it says which variable, I have 2 variables, which one is being the dynamic one, which one's going to be the changing one, and it's B right here. And this is where select of F1 lets you decide which one. I could decide, well, now I want to look at slope and arrow down here and select that one. So you'll notice that changed the variable to the m. So now we're going to look at the m and B will stay the same. So let's actually go back up to B and select that one. We want to be looking at the intercept. Next thing to set up is the speed, and we're going to go into F3 here so you can see what that means. So currently right now it's in, if you look at the 4 symbols, so F1 through F4 are this one right here, which means you can do stop and go. I like this one because I can control it and ask questions and stop and then go and ask questions to see if their conjectures are right. But the default's actually this one, normal. So let's just show you what the default does. And so notice up here, I selected it by choosing F3, and then up here it's showing me which speed. So that means it's just going to play through the range of numbers that I set. So we're good with that. We're going to hit exit to go back, and set is how I set up what values I want it to basically scroll through. So if you notice, we're looking at b-intercept. I want it to stay on the screen. So -5 to a +5. And I'm stepping up by 0.5. You could step up by 1, however you want, but half is good. I like to include decimals. So I'm good with this set. So we're going to hit exit. And now we've set everything up. So B is going to move. It's going to automatically scroll. So dynamic, it's going to be like a movie. And we know it's going to go from 5 to -5. And so we're ready for it to do the dynamic graphing, right? So we're going to hit F6, and this is a video, so it takes a second to set it up. And so remember, I'm on automatically moving, dynamically moving, and it's changing B. So slope we know is 1. It's not changing slope. So what does B seem to be doing to this particular equation? And you could have all these questions. So right now it's on automatic. I can't stop it at any point. I can just have students play. So that's a nice way to start. Have them, look at what's happening and then come up with a conjecture. And then to stop it, you hit all clear. And it takes you back here to the settings. And I'm going to go and change the speed this time to the manual, to the stop and go. So this time I'm going to choose F1. So notice it changed up here. I'm going to hit exit, and I'm going to do it again. And notice it's not moving this time, and that's because I'm controlling it. And so to control it, I'm hitting the execute each time. And I can go through. Now it is going to go through them in order, but I can control when. So this is a nice way to kind of then pause and ask students, make a conjecture. Where is it going to land next? Those types of things. So speed, manual, all that stuff. Now let's hit exit again and exit again. And we could now change the variable that we want. Right now is exploring only B. So maybe we now set B equal to 0 so that there is no intercept. And now we select the slope. So again, select F1. It changes the variable up here that's being controlled by the dynamic. Let's leave these the same. So we're going to change M the same way. So from a -5 to a +5 going by 0.5. We're good with that. And speed, I like to have my stop and go. Or maybe, no, let's do stop and go. I like stop and go. And so let's do dynamic. So now we've changed the coefficient that we're using. We're using the M variable this time and have students explore what happens. We have no slope. No intercept. So now what is that M coefficient doing? Well, it seems to be tilting my line. So dynamic graphing is a great way for students to understand transformations and get a visual aspect, and you can do it manually, automatically. So I'm going to hit exit, and I did want to show you one more thing. So we're going to go all the way back. So I entered this one by hand using my own variables, but this button right here, built in, allows you to choose your built-in variable, so you don't have to actually type it in. So notice that you have a nice selection here. So here's linear again. It's using A and B instead of M and X. Here is 2 different forms of the quadratic. Then we've got a cubic. We've got some trigonometry ones. So there's some built-ins that you can do. So let's just do I like this one right here. This is the I think it's vertex form of the quadratic. So I'm going to say, let's use that one. So notice it just puts it in the second one, and both of these are turned on. So as with anything, I'm going to turn off the line simply by hitting F1 and deselecting it. So notice the difference. So this one's turned off, and this one with the box around it's turned on. So now it's only going to graph this one. So now notice I have 3 coefficients. So let's go into F4 again, where I'm going to set up my variables, right? So notice here's my 3 coefficients, and maybe I want to leave, if I'm only looking at A, let's leave those at 0. Let's just see what happens. So we can change the speed, stop and go, exit. We can look up at the setup, and the setup's staying the same until I change it. So I'm fine with that setup. Let's hit exit, and now let's look at the dynamic graph of this. And I have it as stop and go again. Maybe I should do it as so this is just looking at the changes that the A coefficient does. And so what's that A coefficient doing? So here is this A value. What is that doing? And they can see, oh, when it's positive, it's up, down. So dynamic graphing really allows students to get an understanding of how these transformations are impacted, what do these coefficients do, and get an understanding of where those values lie on the graph, all those different things. So that's a quick overview. Let's hit exit to get back, of the dynamic graphing. So it allows you to visually see changes in transformations of functions.